here's what I've learned. When you ask to be a certain way for a certain characteristic, you don't get the characteristic, but you get the circumstances or the situations that will call that characteristic or trait from you. So for example, if you say this year or this quarter, I'd love to be more patient, I'd love to be more empathetic or more strategic, you are not going to necessarily get the ability to be strategic, the ability to be patient or empathetic. What you are going to find that you get is you are going to get opportunities, circumstances, situations that will require you to be empathetic, to be all of the things you said you wanted to build. They won't come, but you will get situations that will help you become that person. And that, my unlearner, is what I like to call the dark side of change. And that's what we're going to talk about on today's episode of the Unlearners podcast. Welcome to the Unlearners. The Unlearners. Learn, change. Learn, change. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow. The dark side of change, a juicy episode. But I wanted to start this episode here on that idea of the dark side of change and how oftentimes when we think about changing and transforming and embodying a different characteristic. So for example, if I say, oh my goodness, as we close off this quarter, I feel like I wasn't very creative, or I wasn't as creative as I could have been. So maybe in the next quarter, I'm going to be more creative. I want to have the capacity to be more creative, to think more creatively. We often expect that we're just going to get the characteristic out of, hey, who knows where, wherever it is you feel like these things come from. So this idea of the dark side of change is saying this is one of the things that we don't often anticipate, but also we don't view change in that way often. We view it as receiving whatever it is we feel like is our next, whether it's a characteristic, whether it's a perspective, whether it's a habit. We just often feel like we will get it as it is and it will come to us however it comes. But the dark side of change is really saying exactly what today's episode is all about, that you should not, or rather I advise very strongly that you do not, ask for change if you're not ready for it. If you're not in a position, to receive that change, don't ask for it, because the dark side of change is that you will need to do the work of becoming through the situations that will push against you, that will rub up against you, that will annoy you, that will stretch you, so that that characteristic then emerges from within you. I love the example that I heard once from Marianne Williamson, who is actually a teacher, or one of the teachers of A Course in Miracles. And she gives the example of how when a jeweler works with certain stones and they are rough on the outside, or the shape is almost out of sync, or it's not so rounded, well-rounded. She shares how the jeweler will rub those stones against each other to smooth them out, and get them to smooth out by getting them to annoy each other. If you think also of how pearls are formed through a piece of sand actually annoying, really starting to annoy the oyster. And so when these irritants then get stuck within the oyster, there is this process of just rubbing and trying to rid itself of this irritation. And which is caused by the roughness, right? And because of just trying to smooth it out so it's in a more comfortable place and it feels better, then this beautiful pearl is then formed. And it's this idea of the dark side of change that many of us don't like talking about. I mean, we work on this stuff all day, every day. But this is still one of those ideas that many of us, when we think about transformation, we think about change, is something we don't necessarily want to to show up for. It's the dark side of change. It's the idea that because change is going to need you to be in situations that you don't just get the characteristics or the future handed to you, but you will get the circumstances that will bring the creativity, bring the innovativeness, bring the next system, bring all of those things to fruition through you being stimulated in those situations. So the gift is actually the situations. So this dark side of change, also what I've noticed, especially at the individual level, is that we will then start to sabotage ourselves. You either receive the transformation through the circumstances that are really tough and really challenging, or you will self-sabotage. And think about this. Let's say, for example, you say, you know what, I've noticed that I really have trouble with authority in the workplace. And even though we're changing a lot in the business, I find that when my line manager or whoever it is that's leading me at the time does give an instruction or does give direction around something that's meant to be done at the time, it's really hard for me. I do tend to push back. Whether I've done some research of my own or understood or not, it's more of pushing back than trying to understand. So this year, I'm making a decision to be a little bit more open-minded, to be a little bit more conversational in my approach. So you make the decision that this year you're going to do that. But then when you get into a situation next time, let's say, for example, you're finally sitting in front of your line manager, it's you, 4 other colleagues, and the line manager says, okay, we are changing from system X to system Y. And here's why we're doing it. Here's why it's good for the business, but also here's how everyone else is going to benefit. Each and every individual within the team, it's going to help us be a lot more productive with working a little bit less. It's going to save us all time, etc., etc. And they sell it to you and it makes sense. But you can feel that part of yourself that wants to push back, that wants to argue, that wants to fight. And so you say, I know I made the decision this year that I wanted to be more patient. Why am I not feeling more patient? Why am I not feeling a little bit more democratic in my approach? And that's the thing. You will then choose in that moment, or you may then choose in that moment to self-sabotage. Instead of in that moment saying, okay, I have made a decision that I want to show up differently. How do I then use the situation that used to trigger me or that used to invite a certain response from me to choose differently? And that really, in essence, is what change is, at least how we teach it in the frame of unlearning, is it's an opportunity in the same situations to choose something different. And so you either in that position, in that situation that you are then given instead of the characteristic, you can choose to receive or allow that characteristic to emerge from you through choosing differently. Or you can do what most of us do. You can self-sabotage. You can allow yourself to fall back into that default. And as Michael Beckwith says, you can allow your mind to be hijacked by the same old, by the status quo, by the parts of you that's less awoken and less aware and less present. And so through that process, you really want to say, okay, cool, I'm going to show up this way. I'm going to be intentional a little bit here in how I show up. So that's how the dark side of change tends to affect us and how we can sort of move around it. So the big idea then that I want to start off with, maybe as we just sort of move in and get a little bit more practical, because I would love to share with you, how do you then prepare for change? What are some things that you can do as an individual so that when you ask for transformation, when you get to a place in your life or in the organization, in your team where you say, I think we're ready for change. I honestly feel I am ready right now. What are some things that you can do so that you can be in a place of receptivity? Because that's the most important thing. Are you in a space where you can receive it so that you can choose differently when the moment is in front of you? And like Mel Robbins says, you have that 5-second opportunity to apply the 5-second rule. You can choose differently in that moment. So here's the big idea that I wanted to sort of bring in here. And the idea is that I often like to phrase it like this: change will rock your world. I mean, think about it. Think back to a change that you've had to make. And often people will think about transitions when they think about this. And that's also fine, whether it was moving homes, welcoming a new member into the family, having a new leader at work. Anything that needed you to move from one way of doing things into something else, something that needed you to shift a perspective or an identity you held about yourself into another one. Change will literally rock your world. I'll give you a quick example that happened to me not too long ago. So if you follow me on Instagram, you'll know that I am a bit of a gym bunny. So I love working out. I have built a habit of working out at the gym. And I've even got a personal trainer who supports me. And, you know, we have this special app that helps me track my progress and all that sort of thing. So I really, really take pride in how I engage with my exercise routine. Now, my personal trainer used to work with us physically, 3 days a week minimum at the gym, and we would see him. I absolutely adored this human being. And I mean, I still do. I love him. And he used to be with us all the time in the gym. You know, every time we had our workouts, he would be there. We'd make jokes, and he would cheer us on and all sorts of amazing things. Until one day, he changed clubs. So he went from the club where I am based to another one. And he left us with this app where, you know, obviously we would get our workouts updated. We would track our progress still, get little awards and all sorts of things. We could converse with him about our progress, ask questions, that type of thing. But I will never forget when I had to, and I'm getting a bit emotional now, when I had to go to the gym for the first time without him, knowing that I was going to have to shepherd myself there and work out on my own with just this app without him. I was not okay. I was not okay. And I mean, I teach this stuff, but I never underestimate how challenging it can be to change, or how challenging it really is for human beings, because we associate our reality with our identity. It becomes who we are. I was the girl. I was the person who worked out with this personal trainer. He was a part of my life. Having him there was a part of who I was. So that when he left and he was no longer part of my workout exercise routines, my world was rocked, to bring that term back. And that, for me, whatever that change is that you're calling to mind, is exactly what the process of change can be. Your world can literally be rocked in that moment. So I want you to just give yourself the grace of empathy. Give yourself the grace of cutting yourself some slack in that moment, to say that you know just how challenging it can be when you need to let go and grab a hold. And that example was to show you that I also know very, very well, and have been recently in a position, and I still am from time to time. I mean, change is always happening, but that's one of the most recent examples that I can think of that rocked my world. And I mean, I'm still adjusting to it, but having the opportunity to access him through our apps and that type of thing really helps, because I can have conversations with him. I can tell him how I'm doing, and, you know, I can still watch his YouTube videos and all that type of thing. But losing someone who you've started to associate with your identity in that way is really challenging. Now, yours might actually be losing someone in another way. Whatever that change is that you're thinking about, really honor how challenging it can be, because you've associated your identity with those people, with that habit, that house, that thing, that perspective. So when we do then ask for change, there is that sense of loss that's associated with. So never underestimate that. And that's why I've titled this episode, Don't Ask for Change If You're Not Ready for It. Because then if you're not ready for it, you will, like we mentioned in the beginning, you will sabotage it, because you almost haven't created a container to hold that change, to hold that transformation. And because it rocks your world, you almost go, think about your brain going, oh my goodness, this is too much. I can't handle this. I haven't built the systems for this. I don't know how to think like this person. Because remember, you're almost launching a renewed version of yourself. And so your brain is going, I don't know how to think like this person. I don't know how to act like this person. How do I, for example, show up at the gym without my personal trainer? He was the person who directed us on everything we needed to do. Now what do I do? So unless you have become ready or created the container or have become the container that can hold this newfound capacity, this new perspective, this new behavior through whether it's things like discipline, your levels of discipline have risen to then match this new change, then you won't hold it. You will sabotage it. You will find a way to go right back to the version of yourself that you were, and then that change won't happen successfully. And we all know the data around how 70% of organizational changes and transformations fail. Research now is actually showing that that number is even higher than what we thought. And that 70% was ages ago, and still today less than 70%, less than 30% is actually successful organizational changes. I like to say that even personal changes are probably similar, because even when we think we've made a change, a part of us hasn't. And I love the work of William Bridges, who wrote Managing Transitions. He says that there's a difference between a change and a transition, because a transition is when we change at a deeper level in our hearts and in our minds. But a change is the systematic part of it, changing the system, changing the procedure, changing the house, changing the spouse. But then the other part, the transition, is where the letting go and the grabbing hold happens. And most of us don't do that, but we think we've transitioned, but all we've done is change. And that's a beautiful idea. And if that's something that really intrigues you, I'd love to involve it in a conversation we have with your team, if your team is going through something like that. So let's end off this episode then with talking about how can you prepare for change? How do you build an environment within yourself, or how do you equip yourself so that when it is time to change, you are ready and you can hold that change without self-sabotaging? A lot of us are probably really nervous about this because we've had experiences where something new has come into our lives, but we found ourselves just going right back to the versions of ourselves that we've known and how we've always done things. And we haven't allowed ourselves to hold that new version that is now almost wanting to be born at the time. So I've got 3 key things here that I want to share with you that I think will really help you and it really encapsulates some of the key things that we teach when it comes to unlearning. And you'll know this if you've worked with us, but if maybe you, depending on the kind of work we did with you, we may have touched on a few of these or not. Okay, let's get into the list of 3 things, and I'll run through them, explain a little bit as is relevant so you know exactly what to do when it comes to your preparation for change. So that next time when you ask for the change, you actually are ready for it, which is important because you don't want to ask for change if you're not ready for it. All right, let's get into the list. First thing is letting go of the need to be right. Now, this idea has become one of the exciting trends that I'm speaking about a lot now during keynotes and workshops and consulting, is letting go of the need to be right. I share some exciting case studies in one of our keynotes around how it needs to become, and I really want you to hear this, it needs to become more important what is right rather than who is right. Because as long as you live in a space of who is right, then you will never be okay with being wrong. And that in essence is what unlearning is about. It's about saying, I'm okay if what I believed yesterday no longer serves me today. I can let go of that and not let it stir me up to say, oh my goodness, I'm not who I thought I was. Then who does that make me? Oh my goodness, I'm worthless. Oh my goodness, I'm a failure. You don't even need to go there. If you have let go of the need to be right, or you have released your aversion to new things or dissimilar circumstances or circumstances that don't match what you thought you knew. If you can let go of your need to be right, you are almost halfway there because you have gotten to a place where you can accept that certain results or certain remedies or tools or strategies will work for the moment, but they will not work tomorrow. They may not work tomorrow. And that needs to be okay. But also that being right should never be associated with certain people because it's so subjective. And that is really an interesting one. I find when we have conversations with organizations, this one is always interesting because I often ask the question, look around the room and find the person who you know all the right answers will come from. And we always have certain people that everyone looks at. But the second thing we go to is it because that person is always right, or is it because we've told ourselves that that person is always right? And sometimes, and there's some really interesting stories that I've heard around this, around group executives and phenomenal leaders who have opened up to their teams to say that it's not about who's right, it's about what is right. So let's involve various voices within our organizations, because our search in essence is for what will take us forward rather than the people who will own certain ideas. So that's the first one. And letting go of your need to be right is not a process that I'm asking you to do for the next week and then boom, it's done. It is self-awareness work. It is almost even deeper, what some people may call shadow work, because you need to unravel what might be behind it, perhaps, and then giving yourself permission to be wrong. One thing you can try is affirmations. I have an affirmation that I posted quite recently on Instagram or on social media. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you will see that I posted this recently, and it's the affirmation, I allow myself to evolve. Maybe when you feel yourself being triggered, or you feel like you're in a position where you feel condemned because you might have gotten something wrong that might fall within your area of expertise. So now you really feel horrible. Put your hand on your heart, or just sit in a space alone and just consistently repeat to yourself, I allow myself to evolve. It's okay for me to get things wrong. It's safe for me to get things wrong. It doesn't mean that I'm a bad person to get things wrong. Just giving yourself that opportunity to be okay with being wrong, because then what I find is that when you're okay with being wrong, you also know that you can be right. And it's almost this beautiful double-edged sword, but in a positive way. All right, cool. So that's the first one, letting go of the need to be right. Let's jump over then into the second one. So the first one, let go of your need to be right. And then once you are working on that, then you can open yourself up to the second one. Now, in no way am I saying that you need to do these in chronological order, like once you've achieved one of them, then you move on to the second. You can do these in whatever order feels right for you. But these are really the three key things that I strongly suggest, or I would love for you to consider when it comes to preparing for change a little bit better, so that you're ready and you don't sabotage the changes that you are working on and preparing for and even hoping and dreaming about. Second thing, extract the lessons from right now and do it openly. So here's the thing about this. Most of us will look at the way that things are right now and we will go, oh, I can't wait to unlearn this, or I can't wait until this is over, or I can't wait until I finally have that great partner that I'm looking for in my life, or I can't wait until I'm out of this job that I absolutely hate. And we will almost exert this energy, this disempowering energy towards the now, because we're hoping for the future. But what that often does, and what it does at a neuroscience level at least, is it perpetuates this negativity and this disempowering energy that continues to harden or reinforce the neural pathways that are associated with that exact same situation. So what does that do then at the brain level is that the more you play those tapes, those neural pathways get even stronger. They have a deeper impact on your habits, on the way you speak about yourself, on the actions and thoughts that you have. And so you find that you create this pattern that even if by some chance you get a new job, or you get that partner, or you move those homes, you will self-sabotage, because at the end of the day, you are playing the tape of how everything is going wrong and what you don't like about the situation. So step number 2 is extract the lessons. And if you can, really hone in on those lessons. So what do I mean here? When you are in a situation where you're wanting to change, ask yourself, what are the things that are really great about where I am right now? What do I really like about this? Maybe this house that I'm about to move out of, the floors are creaky, and I was like, oh, I don't really like being here. But what do you like? Maybe I actually really like the fact that the color of the walls is white. It's one of those colors that just allow the room to be bright consistently. Oh, I love this cute tiny kitchen that feels cozy. It might not feel like it at the time, but really tap into what it is within that environment that you do want to take forward. So it's all of those positive aspects, but it's also the lessons that come with it. Oh, this house, I appreciate this house because it's teaching me that I would love to have a bigger kitchen. I appreciate the relationship that I have now because it's teaching me that I really prefer to have someone who treats me in this way. I really appreciate this job. As much as things feel really tough right now, I really appreciate how it's grooming me to be more resilient. It's teaching me this, it's teaching me that. Really extracting those lessons and doing it openly. When I say doing it openly, I mean speaking about them, really owning those lessons, owning those things. I used to do something called I forgot what it was called. I think a focus wheel. It was called a focus wheel. And I remember it was during the time when I was changing jobs and I was feeling like, oh my goodness, this job, it's not me. I need to move. Back when I used to be a teacher, and I used to feel like it was time for me to leave. I could feel those growing pains. And so I created this focus wheel. And what the focus wheel was about is putting all of these positive aspects about the thing that you are currently wanting to leave. And focusing in on, oh my goodness, I actually love this job because, and at the school I used to teach at, there were a lot of stairs. So we used to walk all the way up the building to get to my classroom and then all the way back down to take the children to break on the field. So I used to get a lot of exercise, and that was one of the things I had on my focus wheel. I appreciate that this job allows me the opportunity to get my steps in, and I had all of these different positive aspects that I'd included in there as well. So that's one thing that you can think about now is think about extracting those lessons, extracting those positive, empowering aspects so you can continue to build those loops in your brain, build those neural pathways in your brain that are associated with the reality that you want to see in your life and what you want to build. Because the more you build those neural pathways in your brain that are associated with those aspects, then they drive the habits that you want to create. But they also allow you to then focus in your mirror neurons so you see and you recognize the things in your reality that match what you are telling yourself about the world, what you are telling yourself about the kinds of things that you are and the kinds of things that you create in your world. So I think it's really important to extract those lessons from this moment and before the change so that you can be in a better space as you make that shift. You don't want to shift from a place of moving from, but you want to rather have your focus on moving towards without hating and absolutely detesting where you are right now. I don't think that's healthy at all as well. Okay, so the very last one we're going to close off with. So we started with letting go of your need to be right. And then we went on to extracting the lessons and the value from right now and doing it openly. The very last thing that we're now going to look at and close off with is intentionally finding the great results of the change. This is probably one of my favorites, and this is a big focus that we use when we work with teams, is having an opportunity for each and every person to find what the great results of the change are for them. Many people will call this a WIFM, what's in it for me, and I've heard a range of different terms around this. Use the term that you want, but the big idea here is what is actually in it for me moving forward, and really put your focus in on that and zero in on the nature of those results as you change, as you transform. What are the great results that you anticipate gaining? What are the great results, the version of yourself? And when I speak about results here, I want to just emphasize one thing, and I think this is really important. Often what many of us will do is we will say, what are the things that I'm going to get? How much more money am I going to be paid? How much bigger is that house? How much nicer is that car? And those things are relatively okay depending on who you are. But the big idea I want you to hold on to is think about the great results in the form of you. Who are you going to become in the process of the change? As the change happens, who will you become that is different from the version of you that you are now? Are you a lot more empathetic? Are you a lot more resilient? Are you a lot more creative? Are you just a nicer person to be around overall? Are you someone who really supports other people a lot better? Are you someone who creates better quality content that serves people at a higher level? Really see that version of yourself. See the person, see the characteristics rather than the things, because it allows you to really tap into something greater. But then you also allow yourself, like we spoke about in that episode with Minintuli, it also allows you to not put the cart before the horse, but rather say, how do I be, do, have, rather than have, do, be. It's the embodiment, it's the changing at the energetic level that really makes change happen a lot faster, but also a lot more sustainably. You want to start there. And that's what intentionally finding the great results of the change, sussing them out, thinking quite deeply on them, and then asking yourselves, how do I embody this now? How do I become that person now as I make the change, so that when the change finally happens, you have embodied that change. You know how people say dress for the job you want, not for the job you have? It's because in essence what they're saying is that because you've dressed for that job already, by the time it comes, you can hold it. You have become a container that can contain that job, because energetically you are that person who has that job. And that's how I interpret that. And that's how I'd love to invite you to interpret it as well. Okay, so to go through those 3 key ways that you can prepare for the change. The first one was letting go of your need to be right. So release your aversion to new things. Release your aversion to circumstances that are dissimilar from what you're used to. And let go of that need, that fear of being wrong as well is a big part of that. Second thing, extract the lessons from right now in the current reality. Even though you're moving away from it, whether it's intentional or not, really, really hone in on those lessons. You don't want to go through a situation and stay the same person. Allow each and every person to be your teacher. Allow each and every situation that you come across to be your teacher, to grow you, to transform you. That's the second thing. And then the very last thing is intentionally find the great results of the change. Embody that person. Who is the person on the other side that you are going to be? And then step into that person. Really understand the beautiful transformation that's going to happen. And get excited. Get excited about that transformation, because it's beautiful. It's beautiful to transform. It's beautiful to change. One reason why I think it's absolutely beautiful is because when we transform, it reminds us that we can continue to transform. So that even if the transformation doesn't feel like it's the most empowering thing to other people, maybe it's harmful to other people, your transformation in some way. When you do transform, it's a reminder to your brain, to your heart, to your body that you can do it again if that one doesn't fit your circumstances, it doesn't resonate with you. And you are allowed, my beautiful unlearner, to transform, to change, to evolve as many times as you need to, because there is a version of you that is the most empowering at this moment. And when this moment shifts and it requires something different from you, and you feel like the time is right, allow that version. Remember, we started off this episode with allowing those characteristics to emerge from you. Allow the situation to change you. Don't fight. Don't fight the inkling or the stimulation from the renewed environment to call something different from you. When you receive new information about something, allow yourself to change your mind. Allow something new to be born in that moment. And don't deny that. Don't rob yourself of the opportunity to upgrade the version of yourself that you are, to hit the the switch evolve button as and when is needed. And I want to close off this episode with sharing something with you. And I might have shared it on a previous podcast episode. If you're hearing it again, just smile and wave and pretend you're hearing it for the very first time, like I always say. But I wanted to share this idea with you that was shared with a previous mentor of mine, Keith Coates, who's part of the Tomorrow Today Global team. And he used to speak about how, as futurists, and I used to associate myself with futurism a lot more back then, but nowadays I think I do almost fit into the work of being a futurist, which in essence in my thinking is about helping people to think about the future, helping people prepare for the future, helping people unlock and decrypt the future. So he was explaining in his perception what the role of a futurist is. And he said, and this is me paraphrasing his words, but he said that our job is not necessarily to tell people what the future will be, because the future is always changing. And think about it. You sit right now and you think, okay, the next 10 years, this is what I want to do. Next 5 years, this is who I want to be. But those things change because there are certain variables that are at play in our world consistently affecting where things go. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And so he was saying that our role then as futurists is not primarily to tell people what the future will be, because it's always changing. But our work as futurists, but also just you and I like to think, is to help other people, to help ourselves, to be better prepared so that when we get around the corner, and you almost use this metaphor of the corner, rather than telling people what's around the corner, our job is to help people prepare themselves, work on themselves, mind themselves, build the skills within themselves, so that when they get around the corner, they can face whatever is there when they get there, because what is around the corner is always changing. And that's my biggest work as well. As I lead this podcast, as I support you, but also it's your job as an unlearner too. It's your mandate as an unlearner in your work of supporting other individuals through their change journeys and yours. Your job is not to tell people necessarily what the future will be. Ours is to support each other so that when we get around the corner, when we get to the next 5 years, when we get to the change, we are better prepared for it. We can show up better for it. We can be the versions of ourselves that can take it, that can hold it, but can change in response, that can mold and allow the version of ourselves that is needed in that moment to show up for it. Okay. That's a big idea today. Don't ask for change if you're not ready for it. Work on getting ready and then let that change come, because it comes that much easier, but also you can hold it. You can sustain it a lot better. Oh, I loved this conversation. This was so good. I really enjoyed speaking to you today, Unlearner, about getting ready for change, and promise me that you are going to try those 3 key steps and you are going to step into that version of yourself so that when change comes knocking, when change happens, when change is due, you can be the person to show up for it, because our world is changing exponentially. There is so much that is consistently impacting how we see the world, how we behave. And when you can build the skill or the ability to change, that is one of the best skills you can build for yourself, not just today, but any time in the future. Okay, I'm sending you hugs. I'm sending you all of the love. And I hope that you enjoyed today's episode, but also you're going to put it into practice. Let me know what you enjoyed the most out of today's episode in the comments of wherever it is that you are listening to this. Sending you all the hearts, sending you all of the virtual hugs. And I will see you again on the Unlearners podcast, the next episode that we host. One final thing that I just remembered, please do make sure you subscribe to this podcast and share it. Share it with other unlearners that you know that are part of us, that are one of us, that are part of this movement of people who are letting go and grabbing hold and changing and shifting and growing and transforming and just doing amazing things. Lots and lots of love to you, my unlearner. It's been myself, Zanele Njapha, the Unlearning Lady, signing out. And I will see you on the next episode of the Unlearners podcast. Bye for now. The Unlearners, learn, change, grow. Learn, change, grow. The unlearners. The unlearners. Learn, change, grow.